Okay, that's great. And so I know we're actually a little bit ahead of schedule now, and that the public comment opportunity was scheduled to begin at 4 o'clock. But I'm going to propose that we start that now, if that's all right. I'm looking at you, Regional Director Slaughter or Tushar. Is that okay to move forward with this?
It's okay with me. We have people ready to comment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, so we're going to head in that direction. I'm going to share my screen again to do a little bit of introduction around that. So hopefully folks can see this again now. And I too want to thank all the task force members for participating and invite everyone to stay and to listen and to learn during this public input opportunity. So so we have until 5 o'clock to do this. If we have a lot of people who want to get in the queue to share their thoughts. Going to give a couple of guidelines for what we're hoping to, or how we're going to run this right now. So to get in the queue, similar to what the task force members have been doing, so members of the public can click the raised hand button, and again, to access that, you click on the participant tab, and then you find the small hand icon at the bottom right of the participant pod, and then you can click that to raise your hand, and then when you're finished, you can lower your hand as well. When it's your turn in the queue to speak, the facilitator, my colleague Kyle, will actually be reading your name out loud, and he will then unmute you to provide your comment. We're encouraging oral comment to the extent that participants are able to do that. If you're not able to provide oral comment, but you want to share a comment in the chat pod, you can also do that as well. And those messages will be read aloud by the facilitation team, and we'll take those in batches depending on how many comments that we have coming in orally. One other slide here, we want to offer during the public input opportunity that we adhere to the same participation guidelines that we established at the beginning of the meeting. So we're asking everybody to help to honor our agenda and the timing afforded, to participate respectfully, respectfully, to speak in order. When it's your turn to speak, please give your name and affiliation so we know who's speaking, and to good practice, good audio behaviors by speaking clearly into the mic or the phone so we can hear you, and then we'll be muting you again after the comment. So what I would like to do at this point is just to get a feel for how many people are interested to participate in the public comment. I would like to ask members of the public who would like to speak to raise your hand at this point. And I'm going to take a look at how many we have right there. And I see, for starters, maybe a half dozen or so hands raised, and there may be others coming. I would say, just for this is not a formal, hearing or public comment session, but I'm going to propose that we set a time limit for a couple of minutes for each person, and to make sure we can get through the list. And if we have time remaining, we can go back and folks can weigh in again. This is intended to be a little bit more informal. And I'm also going to stop sharing at this point, so that the task force members who are still available, are participating, can come off video again, and we can all see each other a little bit better, at least from the task force member participant. I will be just marking time for folks as they speak, and once you're up around the 2-minute mark, I'll just give you a heads up so we can wrap in an orderly fashion. So I'm going to stop sharing at this point. And I'm going to look at the attendee list, okay? And at this point, I have in the list of attendees Joey Husband, Brandon Burke, Annie Hawkins, Bob Niederhauser, Roy Robinson, and Ruth Perry. We will, I think, start with at the top of the list there. I think these are in the order
Just,
Okay, Cayman? Yep,
can you hear me?
yep.
Yeah, just one amendment. If you have your hand raised, I have allowed you to connect to the audio conference. You have to connect your audio before we're able to take your comment. So if you have your hand raised, I've given you the option to connect your audio. You should have the ability to unmute now. Be sure to do that. I see that everyone other than Annie Hawkins, who has their hand raised, has connected to the audio conference. So, Derek, I'd ask. Yep, everyone has it connected, so you can go ahead.
All right, perfect. So let's get a start. We'll start with Joey Husband. And Joey, if you could introduce yourself and then share your thoughts.
Hello, everyone. This is Joey Husband. I have 37 years in the upstream energy industry. I recently retired. Went to LSU, met my wife there. I lived in Louisiana. I'm from there, and I love the area. I appreciate all the comments today. It's a very interesting initiative that you formed the task force around. And I heard some themes on the cost and the economic model and trying to do things to optimize the supply chain and leverage local resources. And I was thinking the whole time the presentations were made about the consideration for the existing offshore fixed platform infrastructure that's in the Gulf. So I know this is an engineering issue, but have you considered the ability to somehow engineer these turbines onto the platform? If you look at the various decks you have on some of these fixed platforms, there's potential for battery storage or other production of, say, hydrogen, green hydrogen, or ammonia. And then you've got P&A wells that could potentially be re-entered for some of the new technology geothermal that's coming down the pipeline. And then finally, as far as the pipelines themselves, using those as a conduit for transmission. So I'm just thinking about the platforms that I read about that are planned for decommissioning or are under consideration for that because the oil and gas production has dropped off. And just wanted to throw this out there to see if y'all could comment on the potential for leveraging that infrastructure to reduce the cost and the capital investment to make this, to speed up the delivery of wind power or other sources of renewable energy.
All right, Joey, thank you much for both the comments and the questions you posed. I just wanted to let you know that we'll be capturing the comments and the questions, and it's not clear to me whether we're able to answer some of the questions that may be posed during this part of the agenda today. However, I would look to task force members in the BOEM convenience. If there are some questions that you would like to address right away, I would say please jump in and do so before we get to the next speaker. Otherwise, Joey, we're noting that the questions as the type of information that is desired that BOEM can help make available to the public moving forward as part of this broader process.
Eric?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Mike Salata. So actually, this is exactly why we have the request for information, to seek input on ideas just as being proposed. And I think it's important to provide BOEM with as much details in those areas as you can so that we can look into those options.
Okay, thanks, Mike. And thanks, Joey, again. And Jeff, if you could lower your hand, would be great. We'll go next to Brandon Burke. Brandon, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Hey, Eric, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yep, you sound good.
Perfect. Hello, everyone. My name is Brandon Burke. I'm the Vice President of Policy and Regulatory Engagement with the Business Network for Offshore Wind. We are a nonprofit educational organization that's focused on the development of the U.S. offshore wind industry in all regions, and really, more importantly, helping American businesses and workers enter the U.S. offshore wind supply chain. We serve as the convener and stimulator of the U.S. offshore wind supply chain, and every single day we work to bring American companies into this business, into this emerging industry. And to address the inquiry that was made just a few moments ago by Mr. Vorhoff, the Business Network is working with Walt Musial and the NREL team, as well as industry partners, to develop detailed projections for the supply chain capacity that is going to be needed to support the first phase of offshore wind development. So we'd be happy to connect with you on that. But more importantly, I want to mention that studies have revealed that up to 40% of the costs of offshore wind facilities, which includes construction and maintenance of these structures, that overlaps with offshore oil and gas industry costs. And in the Gulf of Mexico, we have deep specialized experience that is needed to plan, manufacture, build, and operate an offshore wind farm because of the prior experience with oil and gas. And beginning these operations in the Gulf of Mexico will drive that knowledge and skill transfers from oil and gas to offshore wind that can not only accelerate development in the Gulf, but overall in all U.S. waters. And this is really critical because a recent economic report from earlier this year noted that the rapidly developing economic opportunity in U.S. offshore wind will well exceed $100 billion for CapEx alone over the next 10 years or so. And that doesn't even account for the long-term operations and maintenance economic opportunities. And the point here is that the Gulf of Mexico really has a unique opportunity to play a major role in unlocking this U.S. opportunity. So thank you for the opportunity to comment. Both myself and the Business Network for Offshore Wind, we thank the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and the task force partners and organizers for the opportunity to comment. Look forward to submitting more detailed written comments. We look forward to partnering with BOEM and everyone else in this call. Thanks very much.
Hey, thank you very much, Brandon. Next up, we have Annie Hawkins, and Annie will be followed by Bob Dieterhauser. So Annie, you'll be unmuted in just a sec.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you well.
Great. Good afternoon. Thanks so much for a really interesting meeting. I definitely learned a lot. I'm interested to hear what's being planned for the Gulf. I wanted to go back to something this morning that Mr. McDuffie said, that BOEM may skip the call area phase if enough industry information is gathered through the RFI. But it was a little unclear because Ms. Matthews this afternoon said that the call area would happen regardless. So either way, my question is that, I've heard from probably a dozen different people that there are maps circulating with specific lease areas, and that this is being treated like it's common knowledge. But as far as I know, nobody from the fishing industry has seen these maps, and they're not included in the RFI, and they weren't in today's presentation. So my question, if I could, is that true? And if it is true, is there any intent to share those maps with members of the fishing industry so that they can be fully informed for comments on the RFI, particularly if there's no later call area process?
So this is Mike again. I can address that. There are no wind energy areas defined in the Gulf. And our RFI went out in a broad area, out to 1,300 meters. At this point, I believe we're planning on a call, unless we get very specific information. The process is to narrow down the areas as we move forward. But there are no maps. There are no wind calls areas. There have been no decisions made at this point.
Okay, great. And so thank you, Annie, for that question. And thanks, Mike, for weighing in.
I could offer additional clarification.
Yeah, please, David. Yeah.
I just wanted to make one thing clear, and hopefully I didn't misspeak in my presentation. But as far as what's optional and what is required, the optional part is the RFI, and the required part is the call for information. So in this case, the RFI has been published, taking that kind of optional step to gather additional information, and then the regulations do require the call for information to be published, so that is a part of our regulatory process. I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Okay, great. And I don't know if Annie's still unmuted, but does that help with your question, Annie?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. I just, I've heard from multiple people that there are maps circulating with BOEM's branding on them. So that may be something that you want to clarify a little more officially, if that's the case, that those may have not come from the agency. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And Annie and Brandon, if you could lower your hands, would be great. So we have Bob Niederhauser next, and then Ruth Perry is next in the queue, and she's actually submitted her comment by chat, which we'll read at that point. So go ahead, Bob Niederhauser, please introduce yourself. We can't hear you.
Eric, just before I unmute Bob, I do want to note that Ruth was able to get her audio connection worked out, so she may want to present that comment orally.
Perfect.
On to Bob.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, you sound good.
I guess this is going to be a two-part question because to answer the previous lady's question on a map, I know the RFI from BOEM does show a map of potential interest that I had printed out just last week, and I have on a whiteboard in my office. So there are maps being circulated by BOEM as part of the RFI, but it is only as areas of interest, not specific to, I believe, lease areas. But my primary question, to piggyback the business network of offshore wind, a lot of the concern on the supply industry in the Gulf of Mexico and oil and gas entities that have extensive experience with offshore opportunities, production platforms, drilling, etc. Is it the intent of BOEM to potentially, as a condition on the lease for these areas, to require vessels to have a Buy American clause, as will be subject to the operators and any of their subcontractors on doing the install of the wind farms themselves?
Bob, thanks for that question. Could you just introduce yourself in terms of affiliation?
Yes, my apologies. Bob Niederhauser with Thrustmaster of Texas. We're the sole U.S. manufacturer of propulsion systems, and we're working with a number of shipyards, owner-operators to promote Buy American as part of these new vessels that will be required to support the industry both on the Atlantic as well as in the Gulf of Mexico.
All right, thank you very much, Bob. Looking at some of the BOEM stuff, is this a question that we were able to answer now, or is that something we want to look into?
I think it's probably something that we need to look into. BOEM in the Gulf has not gotten to a stage where we've issued a proposed sale notice that may have, so that is further down the line for us. That is not something that we have looked into at this point in time, but there may be some answer that we can provide from the directorate.
Okay, thank you, Bob, for that question. So next we have Ruth Perry, who I think has been able to access audio, and Ruth will be followed by Zach Eubanks. So to Ruth Perry, please, and please introduce yourself and share your affiliation.
Sure, Eric, can you hear me?
Yes, you sound good.
All right, great. Hi, everybody. Ruth Perry. I'm the Regulatory Affairs Manager for Shell's Offshore Wind Americas. Under our renewables and energy solution business, so offshore wind developer, but also we have a prominent oil and gas business in the Gulf of Mexico, which I'm sure most on the task force are well familiar. And we are certainly excited to see the Gulf of Mexico opportunity, and we will be active participants in that going forward in the process. So I want to thank everybody quickly on the task force for the presentations and the opportunity to take public comment today, and look forward to this process. And also to BOEM for setting an optimistic tone that the Gulf can take a unique lead, and also some unique approaches to balancing multi-use. There's a rich history of doing that in the Gulf of Mexico. I think you heard that across many of the presenters today. I'm curious with the amount of information that Randy and Greg and a few of the others presented, given the amount of existing information that's across the federal state families, do you see an opportunity to start compiling that information now as part of maybe a public-private collaboration effort? And what would that take from a data management time resourcing? I'm not entirely sure that the marine cadastre is the best way to do that. And there is some precedence for doing this with bathymetry and habitat data, for instance, from oil and gas surveys. There's also some examples of doing that across fisheries and other co-uses. And so with the Gulf having a formal regional ocean partnership, the Gulf of Mexico Alliance, I'm wondering if it would make sense for the states on the task force to push through their governor's participation and support of GOMA to potentially push this as a priority, or another mechanism that we can easily stand up a cohesive data management effort that could run parallel to the task force activities. Because there is some models for doing that, which I'm sure some of the task force members didn't have time to speak into, but it certainly flags as an opportunity for a unique approach that could be taken specifically for the siting of offshore wind as we go through the iterations of RFIs, call areas, wind energy areas, and leasing. So just curious if there's any initial reactions to that or thoughts.
Okay. Thank you, Ruth, for the comment and the question about data management, among other things. Is that?
Yeah, this is Mike again. So I 100% agree. And I think BOEM's goal with the task force is to start collecting data now. Whether we do a public-private partnership, I do think that's something beyond that can't be answered today. I think we're happy to engage with the state representatives here and have further discussions as whether that's something that GOMA could do. That's not a decision BOEM that can make, but I 100% agree that there's a lot of information, a lot of data that we saw today that we need to gather effectively and put in a location to share everything.
I agree. Thank you, Ruth, and thank you, Mike, for the response there. Ruth, you can put your hand down once you're done. Next will be Zach Eubanks, and who will be followed by Brian Campbell. So, Zach.
Thanks for unmuting me, and thank you everyone for participating today and sharing this initial information in the Gulf of Mexico. My background is a marine consultant here in New Orleans, and I have previously worked out of Port Fourchon as a surveyor and a whole bunch of other things in the marine industry. My main comment, and it's kind of multifaceted, so there's different questions, would be there was initially a question of whether there would be hurricane-proofed or hurricane-designed, like hardened wind turbine technology for the Gulf of Mexico. And is this something that each entity might support, especially for floating wind or high-altitude wind energy, which would be non-traditional turbines, as far as energy development? And have parties in the task force considered that sort of support? And if that would be towards US-based or Gulf of Mexico-based companies? The second part would be based on how the determination of commercial interest in a specific lease area is determined. And if there is no interest by other parties, what is the process after that determination has been made? And that really segues in how the transmission, I guess, via electricity versus transmission versus hydrogen pipeline might be considered, especially in the Gulf of Mexico with the existing infrastructure. And lastly, which I'm anticipating you would not have an answer for, as part of the initial rules and regulations that were presented, it was that any entity that would, I guess, develop the resources on the continental shelf would have to go through this leasing and certification process. I've seen in the European side, there are, we'll say, sailing vessels that generate hydrogen in real time. And how would a vessel like that operating in US waters be viewed by, say, the Coast Guard versus the Bureau of Offshore Energy Management and some of the wind players, if you are harnessing wind and generating electricity, but storing it on a vessel? I think that surmises my list of initial questions, and thank you again for allowing me to participate.
Thank you, Hugh. You really threw some detailed questions into your comment there. So there were several. I don't know if all of these can be answered during this meeting, but I will look to some of BOEM staff or other task force members. There was a question about hurricane-proof technology, another one about sort of the competitive versus non-competitive leasing process, another one about infrastructure, and Hugh, we did capture all of your questions, so that they will be noted as of interest to the public moving forward.
Thank you.
So I don't think, I think many of those questions are beyond the, the scope of this meeting, and we would need to get answers to it. It is possible that Trishara or someone from Dave McDuffie, they could answer the competitive versus non-competitive process if they're still on. Otherwise, we can defer that question as well.
Sure, Mike, I can speak to the competitive determination process. We will typically receive the industry input during the RFI, but really that will be used to further refine the area that would be put out in a call for information and nominations. And then once we receive, we're asking, when we publish that call, asking for industry to nominate specific areas they would be interested in leasing. And at that point, we would make a determination of whether or not we have that competitive interest. There's different factors to consider. One is the simple geographic overlap of different areas that industry has nominated. Other things to look at are potential environmental constraints that may limit where different leases can be issued. So, but as Mike appropriately pointed out, that's something that's a little bit farther down the line.
All right, thank you, David. And thank you, Zach, for your questions. And apparently I misspoke your name, so apologies for that. Before we get to Brian Cameron, it's been pointed out to me that we got a comment a little while back through the chat that I will read to folks. This is from Joel Merriman. And Joel wrote, I want to thank Randy Wilson from Fish and Wildlife Service for the informative presentation about birds. Offshore wind collision risks to nocturnal migratory birds are thus far not well evaluated in the Atlantic, so I'm glad it's on your radar early in the process in the Gulf. We urge the Fish and Wildlife Service to evaluate nocturnal migrant flight activity and collision risks offshore within Gulf wind energy areas, i.e. not just from land, if that's not already being done. I assume this would entail using radar on stable platforms. So thank you, Joel Merriman, for that comment. Let's move on to our next person in the queue. We have Brian Cameron, and Brian will be followed by Olivia Richard. And Zach, if you could put your hand down, please, would be great. So Brian.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the presentations all day. It's been really interesting. My name is Brian Cameron. I'm actually an employee with BOEM. I have a couple of questions. One of them really is a comment, and that is that BOEM and Bessie consider the financial assurance that would cover full decommissioning and removal of all infrastructure, the renewable energy, like the offshore wind farms in the Gulf of Mexico. We have situations that have come about over the years with cost of decommissioning increasing, and we would like to see that, just make sure that that's taken into consideration. The other thing I have is a question for David Kaiser with NOAA. Have you heard anything about any of the coastal management programs in the Gulf of Mexico looking to change, or not really change, but add renewable energy activities into their listed activities, so that way they could automatically get a consistency review as opposed to having to go through an unlisted activity request process at a later date? And thank y'all.
So David Kaiser, is that
Yeah, hi, Brian. So I addressed that in my presentation, sort of, but we would have to look at each individual state's federal consistency list to see if the way they've worded it capture the renewable energy program, which they probably don't. So they would have to amend that list to add that. And then in order to get automatic review and not do an unlisted activity, they would also have to propose a geographic location description in federal waters where they would have to consult with BOEM and make their coastal effects analysis for that area, and we would have to approve that.
Thank you.
Thank you, David, for that response. So we'll
I was going to say, but no state has contacted us yet regarding the development of that.
okay, great. So thank you, Brian, for that question, and David for that response. And Brian, if you could put your hand down when you have a second. So next in the queue is Olivia Richard, and Olivia will be followed by Roy Robinson. So Olivia, on YouTube.
Hi, my name's Olivia. I'm a student at the University of Texas, and I'm currently working with Environment Texas to help aid Texas's transition to renewable energy. So I'm currently working on offshore wind advocacy. And this is a really broad question, I guess, for anybody who wants to answer it. But well, I can't help but notice the lack of state representation from Texas present at this meeting. So how can we at Environment Texas help engage Texans, both in our state legislature and local elected officials in Port Arthur and Port Isabel to promote offshore wind here in the state?
I'm not sure that's something that I can answer today.
Yes,
Can answer. We did have some Texas representatives on earlier today. They may have already logged off, but we did have 3 that were on earlier from Texas.
Right. So one option, Olivia, would be we will capture all of the task force members who participated in the meeting in our summary, and you could track down those names, or we could help track them down for you, and would invite you to coordinate with them as Texas task force members.
Awesome, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, as I said, and I know that Tushar has been coordinating with representatives from Texas and Mississippi, as well as Louisiana and Alabama, in preparation for the meeting. So next I had Roy Robinson.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Roy.
Good.
Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Roy Robinson from Excipio Energy. We're an offshore renewable energy company based out of Houston. And first off, really glad to see this initiative and seeing you guys pulling this together. I have a couple of quick questions and one comment. The quick question is, under this RFI, and you may have covered it, I couldn't catch the whole thing today. Is there allowance for submitting proposed areas under subpart J of 585? And then the next point I would make is that we were just given, I'm just allowed to announce this, we were given a grant to help repurpose the offshore platforms in the Gulf of Mexico for renewable energy purposes. So I've got some money to study that. And with regards to that young lady who just spoke, Olivia, if she wants to get in touch, there are a lot of politically connected people at Greentown Labs in Houston. And also we're aware of some. If she wants to get directly in contact with me, I can help her find the people in Texas that are pushing for this. My main question is about the 585 subpart J, about the right of use of easement for existing leases.
Right, is that if Josh Ganges can weigh in on that?
Hi, this is Tashara. The RFI was mainly for wind energy, but we did note that you can make other recommendations as well. So if you want to recommend other uses, that you can make a recommendation in the RFI as well with that. We did open it up for any other.
This is for I'm speaking of using subpart J for the wind energy, so using for wind hubs.
Yeah, the alternate use subpart J.
You're allowed to put the wind turbines on the existing leases under that same subpart. They don't have to be just attached to the platform. It's the block that you repurpose.
That's correct.
So that is
So you can
allowed.
make the
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, you can make, yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roy. And I'm noticing that just in response to the question from Olivia Richard earlier, that we've been getting a few texts from other participants who are also from Texas state government, although that they're not formal task force members. And so we'll make sure that we capture to the extent we can all of the participants from both the task force and the general public in the meeting summary. And in this case, it was Allison Buchin, perhaps from the Texas GLO. All right, so next on the list, we have Amy Thurlow, and Amy will be followed by Douglas Campbell. So Amy, you're next.
Can y'all hear me?
Yep, you sound good.
Howdy. I'm from the great state of Texas. So I'm an independent consultant with over 15 years of deep water offshore experience as a project manager working for operators in developing new fields. So first off, I just want to say thanks to all the various agencies for your presentations today. Everyone's times and efforts are greatly appreciated, and want to give a big shout out to the state of Louisiana for their leadership in the Gulf of Mexico. I was really impressed by everything they've done to date and planned for the future. It's obvious that they are here to stay and are setting themselves up to be the key players to start developing offshore lease blocks as they are showing they want and are ready to work with developers, or getting ready to work with developers. Is BOEM going to be looking at lease blocks that are just fixed, doing lease blocks that are just fixed bottom, or are they also going to be considering floating lease blocks? You know, with the experience we have here in the Gulf of Mexico and with our sediment types and with the deeper water, we are really set up to be the national leaders in floating wind. And I think we have a lot to play there. So I'm curious how BOEM's going to handle that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Amy. So just a question about the fixed bottom versus floating turbines.
Yeah, this is Mike again. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you sound good.
Yeah, the request for information is asking for information about ideas. So if there are proposals on fixed bottom versus floating, we would appreciate that input. At this point, one of the reasons that the map, and we did issue a map with the RFI, but it's very broad. It covers the central and western planning areas, as you would understand them, from oil and gas out to 1,300 meters. The 1,300 meter limit was set on the current technological limit, or the approximate technological limit of floating wind.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you, Amy, for that question. And Amy, when you have a chance, if you could lower your hand. Next, we have Douglas Campbell. And after that, in the queue, we have Ray Newby. And those are all the hands I have up now. So if you're a participant from the public and would like to get in the queue, invite you to look at the participants tab at the bottom of your screen in the lower right, click it and find the raise hand icon, and you can join the queue as well. So off to Douglas Campbell.
Can you hear me? I just want to confirm that you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead, please introduce yourself, Doug.
Okay, good. Yeah, my name's Douglas Campbell. I'm also an independent consultant, but I've worked in the oil and gas industry for 30 plus years and have been engaged with the offshore wind in the U.S. for the last 7, 8, 9 years or so. I'm now working closely with some companies in Europe and the United States, one of which is Oil States, which has created a new division called OSI Renewables. So we're very interested in of course, the East Coast offshore wind and the Gulf of Mexico. My question is, I heard earlier, and forgive me if this has already been addressed, but I was kind of in and out during the day with my other duties. But I've heard this 2030 for the Gulf of Mexico to be mature, or projects coming to fruition in the Gulf of Mexico. And I'd like to know that is the experience that the oil and gas operators and the operations experience that the secondary supply chain had offshore, will that expedite the process at all? I mean, I've already gone through this with lease and permitting with the oil and gas and offshore operations, getting COPs approved and so forth. Will that help to expedite that, or has that been factored into this 2030 deadline?
Yeah, this is Mike Salata. I'm not sure what the 2030 deadline is. The only date that we propose at this point is December 2022 for a renewable energy auction.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I probably should have said deadline. I heard some expectations that 2030 was a time frame for projects going forward and being approved and coming, like I said, into operation in the Gulf of Mexico. Maybe I heard that wrong.
I know that the director and talked about that. I think it's 30 gigawatts of offshore energy by 2030 as an objective of BOEM.
Okay. So anyway, back to the question, do you think that the experience we have in the Gulf will help expedite, getting the ball rolling, so to speak, in the Gulf of Mexico? We know it took a long time on the East Coast for a lot of the projects, and there were different hurdles along the way. And I thought if the Gulf of Mexico going to be a little softer way forward or more expeditious process.
Yeah, I think past experience will allow us to continue to collaborate effectively moving forward.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Doug, for your question and for your enthusiasm. We just have one more hand in the queue right now. And Doug, when you have a chance, please lower your hand. We have Ray Newby.
Sure.
So Ray, please introduce yourself once you're on mute or off mute.
Ray, you're unmuted. You can go ahead. You may be muted on your microphone itself rather than in the system.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, all right. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. And hello, Eric, and hello, everybody with BOEM and other presenters. I really like the forum you guys have set up. I thought it's been very informative. My name is Ray Newby. I work for a consulting firm called Anchor QEA. I just recently retired from working for the Texas General Land Office. I guess my main question is, BOEM was very proactive in reaching out to the states and the oil and gas industry to look at potential resource conflicts with existing infrastructure and a lot of decommissioned infrastructure with respect to significant sand source areas. And these are sand source areas that were identified for coastal restoration. And I've got a lot of confidence that that will work with the renewable energy industry to avoid those resources. But my main question is, how is BOEM and the industry planning to address the installation of, I'm thinking mainly of transmission cables, with the spider web of oil and gas pipelines that are spread across the Gulf? And are these cables going to be buried? And how will the intersection of transmission cables and pipelines be addressed?
Yeah, this is Mike Salata again. So I think that's a very good question, and I don't think that's one that we have an answer for. That is one that we are definitely evaluating and studying moving forward.
Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you, Ray, for that question. Good to hear your voice. I think I don't see any other hands up, but we do have another, it looks like question that came in via the chat. And this is from Connor Roberts with Looper Goodwin Law Firm. And he asks, how do we ensure that these renewable energy initiatives survive changes in political party on the state and federal level? As we begin to talk to clients about this opportunity, how can we assure them these opportunities won't be undone by changes in political party?
I'm, as a career federal employee, I'm not sure that's appropriate for me to answer. or that I have an answer to that question at this point in time.
Thanks, Mike. And Connor, you do point out an important contextual factor that I think is not unique to offshore renewable development in the Gulf, that I think everyone will be paying attention to, and the results to be seen. Okay, are there, I'm looking any other members of the public who would like to share some thoughts or reflections on the presentations or ideas with the task force members, or ask any questions? And invite you again now to raise your hand. Oh, I see Roy Robinson's hand has gone up again. Yeah, go ahead, Roy.
Yep.
Yeah, we can hear you. You're breaking up just a little bit.
I tried to send it to phone in. I'm actually on vacation. I'm having trouble communicating. But the plan is just offshore wind, just offshore wind focus. There's other energy out there. Is there an effort going forward to for say OTEC and offshore geothermal wave energy, which by itself, but if you combine it with the wind, it works?
Okay, good. And Roy, you were breaking up a little bit in your audio, so I'm going to read the note you sent via the chat as well. And the question was, is there any plan to have a similar meeting covering other offshore renewable technologies? And you list OTEC, wave energy, offshore geothermal.
Yeah, this is Mike Slot again. So I think it's incumbent on us to look at the RFI and the comments and then evaluate those. And then before we make any further decisions on whether that we should move in those directions at this point.
All right, thank you, Mike, and thank you, Roy, again for that question. Any other that we're getting near the end here? Looking for any final hands up coming from members of the public. Otherwise, we will wrap up the meeting. So last call.
Nothing else on the chat line either, Eric.
Last call.
Last call area for comments. Okay, so seeing none, I think I really want to thank the members of the public. We had many of you participating in this meeting today, and we really appreciate you carving out the time and both observing the task force and engaging along the way. This is, I think, the beginning of a long process for what will take place, and that BOEM will be helping to guide in the Gulf of Mexico region. We're about to wrap up. I would turn now at this point to either Mike Salata or Tashara Matthews or Idrissa Boubé for final thoughts coming from our conveners.
Yeah, this is Mike. I just want to thank everyone for participating and for hanging in there today. I appreciate the questions from the public. I think the discussions today and the questions are helpful to BOEM moving forward to make effective decisions on implementing renewable energy in the Gulf. So thank you.
All right, thanks, Mike.
Okay. Yes, and I would like to thank the Kearns and West team. I would like to thank the public and the presenters today. We've been working on this for a while, and it all came together, and I'm just thankful. And I'm thankful for the comments that you all provided, and the BOEM team as well, and our Fed partners and tribal nations that were here today. So thank you all for representing and being here with us throughout the entire day. That's very important to us to get these comments in so that we'll know where we need to go next. So thank you.
Okay, good. Well, again, thank you to the BOEM conveners, and thank you to all the task force members for your participation today and the presenters. And this is a wrap. We are adjourned. Everyone have a wonderful end of your day, and we look forward to seeing you again. Take care all.